Why am I returning to the topic of the media's role in the attempt to cover up Joe Biden's loss of mental acuity? I'm doing it because we had a long running cover up of the press's attempt working with the Biden people and other Democrats to suppress the truth. And now they're trying to suppress their role. The media has still not admitted what they did. So you had a long running attempt to create a fiction that Joe Biden was just fine. And now you've got a long running attempt, which unfortunately seems to be succeeding, to pretend that this was a problem for the Democrats, that people in the Biden circle covered up Joe Biden's loss of mental acuity decline. And there was no way for the media to know that this was happening. And that the only reason now we know some of the details is because of the groundbreaking reporting of Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. The lies about both things, about what happened in real time and about what's happening now, it survived the book tour. It survived the book tour both for these two authors, but also for the dominant media at large. If you look at the coverage, you won't find the Washington Post, New York Times, et cetera, writing long pieces about how their newsrooms failed. And not just failed because they didn't work hard enough, but they failed because they were browbeat by the Biden people not to report the truth. And they didn't want to report the truth because they didn't want to help Donald Trump. These are facts, okay? So now what's revved up my interest in this again, to talk about it to you again, is that the authors are back. Hugh Hewitt loves doing book interviews. Hewitt's a great interviewer. He's really one of the best interviewers in the country. He reads the book, he prepares, he's thoughtful, and he knows about the crafts of doing interviews. So when I saw that Hugh had an interview with the authors, I thought, well, maybe their attempt to cover this thing up won't work, right? And so I watched it. Now, let's review the storyline of this book and of the dominant media about their role in the attempt to keep the American people from acting on what everybody was seeing, the loss of acuity decline, was that until that debate in 2024, where Biden collapsed on stage with Donald Trump, that the public didn't know anything about Joe Biden's decline, that this was a revelatory evening. And that what's happened now, this is the storyline of the book and of the narrative and of their press tour, is that Tapper and Thompson uncovered the truth. And that their truth was that starting in 2023 and the end of 2023, that a few hundred Democrats in private settings saw Biden's decline, but they didn't say anything about it. And so that they're guilty of having witnessed something no one else saw. This is the storyline. No one else saw, and they didn't say anything about it. And that therefore we got to the debate, and oh my goodness, what a surprise. Joe Biden has suffered mental acuity decline at 9:00 at night. The other part of their storyline, which again is a fiction, but that they've kept at it and succeeded in many quarters, was that the reason the press didn't report what everyone in America was seeing was not because they had bias against Donald Trump. That wasn't the reason. The reason was because they didn't see it. There was no way for them to see it because it was all kept secret, okay? That it was hidden by a White House conspiracy that was so effective that no one, including Jake Tapper, could have known about Biden's decline until the debate. Now, Alex Thompson, and this is one of the weird things about this, Alex Thompson did write about it. He was one of the few reporters who write about it, but Jake Tapper didn't talk about it. We know that none of that storyline is true. We know that the press, everybody saw what was happening, and we know that it didn't take their reporting to know this. What's the real storyline? The real thing that happened is the liberal media knew all about it, because they have eyes and ears and C-SPAN too. But they kept quiet because they were part of an actual conspiracy of silence to try to keep Donald Trump from winning the White House back, and because the Biden White House threatened them. That's what happened. That's the truth. So as I said, now here comes Hugh Hewitt belatedly interviewing these guys who up until now, despite a few really strong efforts, Megyn Kelly is amongst them, they got away with it. They did all these interviews for the book. They were ubiquitous. And yet they got away with this fiction that their reporting is revealing the history of Biden revealing his mental acuity decline, but only behind closed doors. And it's only in these 6 or so moments that Hugh talks to them about that people saw it, Democrats saw it, but the press could never see it. So disappointing. Again, Hugh's a great interviewer, but a friend of Hugh's told me, when Hugh does book interviews, he just likes to let the authors talk about the book, sell the book. And that's how he gets people to come on to talk about their books. And I get that. I get respect for authors. I'm an author. I like when I can go on a show and sell. But I was trying to think of a metaphor for this. Somebody writes a book about how to kill baby chickens, how to torture baby chickens. You wouldn't let him come on the show and say, well, walk me through how you kill baby chickens. This is such a critical moment for our democracy. It's such a watershed after decades of liberal media bias. So disappointing to me that these guys were allowed to go on with one of the few interviewers in the country who could do this right. And instead, not only are they allowed to continue to spread this storyline, this mythical storyline of theirs, that the press couldn't possibly have gotten to the bottom of this until these two swashbuckling and enterprising reporters did hundreds of interviews to find out what was happening behind the scenes. There was no difference between Biden behind the scenes and Biden in public. But that they continue to just talk about it as if uninterrupted. They're uninterrupted. And Hugh basically doesn't interrupt them. He not only lets them continue to spread their fiction, he helps them. He helps them. He starts out by talking to them about what he just walks through 6 events starting in September of 23 into the beginning of 24, where Democrats and in one case, some Republicans are seeing behind closed doors Biden behaving exactly like he behaved in the debate, but exactly like he behaved earlier, including in 2022 when he spoke at a public event to a dead Congresswoman. So here's Hugh Hewitt beginning the interview, talking to them about some of these private events that they write about. Roll A1, please.
I want to start in the Manhattan home of Kerry Fowler and Amy Goldman Fowler on September 20th, 2023. Jake, what was unusual about that? Michael Shearer, the New York Times frequent guest on this program, was there. What happened? Yeah. But where we are is what I've laid out here are 6 different events, and hundreds of people know that the president has fallen into infirmity. Is that fair, Jake? Hundreds of people know.
I would say it's fair to say that as of what's going on in the fall of 2023 and early 2024, hundreds of people see moments of serious addlement that cause various degrees of concern. But your larger point that there are hundreds of people who saw what we all saw debate night behind the scenes and didn't say anything at all to anyone that we know of in terms of like trying to like reach out to people at the White House or the campaign and say, this isn't going to work. I take your point and I don't disagree.
This makes me mental. Hundreds of people knew, hundreds of people saw. No, millions of people saw. Hundreds of people saw it up close and personal in private events, and great reporting on their part to tell the stories of these private events. Millions of people saw. As I've told you before, I saw it in 2017 at a public event. Millions, tens of millions. And the polls reflected that. And so when Jay Tapper is critical of these Democrats who were at these private meetings and didn't ring the alarm and say, guess what? We saw Joe Biden's mental acuity decline. The same thing's true of, guess what? Jay Tapper and almost everyone else in the dominant media who saw it in public and didn't say a word. Didn't say a word. And at one of the events they talk about, there was a New York Times pool reporter who saw it. Now, it got a little coverage, just as when Joe Biden talked to the dead Congresswoman, it got a little bit of coverage, but it didn't cause the kind of uproar that we saw after the debate. Wonder why. All right. Hugh asked them about Robert Hur. He's a special counsel who wrote in his report that although Joe Biden seemed to have broken the law by taking classified documents, that he wasn't going to indict him because he was an sympathetic elderly man with a poor memory. Okay. So again, the premise is Hur was beaten up for saying this about Biden, and the press beat him up, including CNN. Lots of evidence that CNN criticized Hur for his report. The Biden people criticized him. And it's like, well, of course we didn't speak up at the time about Hur and how accurate his report was, because how could we have known? Roll A4, please.
Integrity points for Robert Hur. And I also think the night of the debate, when one of his team texts vindication or something like that of the debate, they are feeling vindicated because they got slimed. And again, there were hundreds of people who knew they were being slimed, and nobody said anything. I'm just astonished that nobody who knows steps up and says, no, Mr. Hur.
Again, makes me mental. Hundreds of people knew and didn't say anything in defense of Hur. No, millions of people did. And many of us did say Hur's report seems accurate based on what we've seen in public. And yet again, I say with respect to Hugh, aiding and abetting the mythology that the Hur report was, quote unquote, rightfully dismissed at the time, because how could anyone have known that Hur's characterization of Joe Biden was accurate? It just doesn't make any sense. All right, another example. Alex Thompson talking to him and saying, okay, like Democrats had this incentive to cover things up. Democrats had the incentive to not speak out. Here's Alex Thompson on that.
Because all the incentives were geared towards not saying anything. Donors didn't want to say anything because they didn't want to be attacked by the Biden folks. Democratic leaders who saw moments basically felt that by speaking out, they were going to end up like former Congressman Dean Phillips and basically be driven out of Congress. The threat that a lot of Democrats believe, I think sincerely, that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy. And if you believe that, you can rationalize anything, including putting a person that you know is not up to 4 more years in the Oval Office.
Again, Alex Thompson's words apply. He's correct to donors who saw it and didn't say anything. It applies to politicians, Democratic politicians who were worried about it. But guess what? It also applies to the media. The exact things he said. The incentives for the media, just like the incentives for the Democrats, don't say anything, even though we all can see it, because you'll help Donald Trump win. That's not the proper role for the media. It's not the proper. They act in this whole book, in this whole interview. And again, I say sadly, Hugh aids and abets them. They act like Biden's decline was some sort of long-running secret that they had privately, that the small group, or several hundred, and say it's small or not, that they secretly knew it and they didn't say anything. Guess who also knew it secretly and didn't say anything? The media. Guess what this book does to hold the media accountable? Nothing. All right. It's going to be A6. This is Jake Tapper talking about when Joe Biden's mental health decline started.
I would say our reporting suggests that some of the infirmity was visible at times as far back as 2015 after the death of his son Beau. People thought it was grief, but in retrospect they thought it possibly was much more than that. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. But I do think 2023 is when it got past the point of no return. That's not just infirm because he's old. It's infirm because there is some sort of decline happening, some sort of cognitive decline.
Okay, a couple things here. And again, this is where the contradictions in how this book is framed are so outrageous and so obvious and so frustrating to me that other people pointing it out. The book says correctly, there were signs of decline back in while Biden was still in vice president or just leaving the vice presidency. Okay. So if you could see it back then, now I don't know whether it got how much worse, their premise is it progressed to much worse in 23. Maybe he had good days and bad days. And remember, in 24, he gave the State of the Union. So it wasn't like he was bad every day. But Tapper, on the one hand, takes the position this could be seen in public in long ago, and that many people saw it in private long ago. But then he also takes the position, well, no one knew. We couldn't possibly know. Then the other contradiction is they say, well, we could diagnose it. We could see that there were problems. Whereas elsewhere, they take the position where you had to be a doctor to know. It wasn't right to be an armchair analyst, an armchair doctor. Okay. Now, Hugh says, and this is again why I'm so flustered and baffled by his role. Hugh tells them in the interview that he knew, like a lot of conservatives knew and spoke out, that somehow magically conservatives could see in public what Jake Tapper and most other reporters couldn't see, that there was a problem. And they were saying it from the time Biden was running for president in 20. Here's Hugh Hewitt astonished. A8, please.
My father-in-law, Marine Corps Colonel, late great man, fought on Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima. He died of a combination of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. I was the lawyer in the family, so I got to walk him through that. There are lots of references to that in Original Sin, to people who've seen aging parents and in-laws go down this slope either at a fast pace or a slow pace. But everybody knows that it's happening. What I'm astonished by is that we did not find out until the debate.
Again, now Hugh is joining them in saying this illogical thing. Hugh says, I knew it, I saw it, And I had a relative who had something similar, so I was very familiar. And then he caps that account by saying, it's astonishing we didn't find out to the debate. It doesn't make any sense. Even if you didn't have a relative, as Hugh did, with a comparable type of decline, it was on offer in public for years. And so when Hugh says we only found out to the debate, no, since at least 2022, when he talked to the dead congressman, although there are earlier examples, Hugh knows it's not true. He knows we didn't just find out at the debate. And we know that because Hugh talks about the fact that he referred to Biden as infirm. Now, he used the phrase infirm because it's not a medical term. But here's Hugh once again saying he knew. A3, please.
I've got it on tape from 2022, early 2022. I always use the term he's infirm and getting more so, because that's not a medical term. It's an observational term that lawyers can use, and people can make that judgment without being a professional. Infirmity does not mean necessarily cognitive impairment, but when the people in these rooms see him in the way, I didn't get to interview President Biden, and I think the reason is he wasn't up to a serious interview.
So a guy's not up for doing an interview. Now, Hugh's a pretty tough interviewer, but a guy who's not up to doing an interview, a guy who says the things and does the things he does in public, no one should have been surprised by the debate. And that's, again, one of the premises of the book and one of the premises of Hugh's interview, that the debate was a shock. It was a shock. People were shocked. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't shocked at all. How could anyone have been shocked? And yet that's the premise of the book that Hugh endorses. So he asked the authors, again, this is contradictory. Why didn't they include people like Hugh and other conservative media and a few independent reporters who saw, along with the American people, what had happened? Okay. So their answer is hilarious. It's kind of a two-part answer. And the first is that the book was too long already, so they couldn't include it. But also that they chose not to focus on what happened in public.